this thing on? So when we study society, things can be very big, you know, like a country, a nation, or a large group of people. But things can also be small. Why am I always so small? Seriously, why do you do that to me? Come on, man. Anyway, so linking these things with each other, that's what we're looking into. Okay, so what is the micro-macro link? When we study society, we can look at it at different levels. We can look at the very big things, you know, the overall picture. That's what we call the macro. Or we can look at things on a much smaller, lower level. That's what we would call the micro. More generally, different disciplines look at things at different levels. So somebody might look at the planet as a whole. You know, that's an astronomer or a geographer, geologist, or somebody who studies climate change. Then you might look at different nations. Maybe that's what you do in political sciences. You look at how different nations or national identities develop. But then you could go on and study groups. In a way, that's what we do in sociology or in social psychology, how individuals interact. But then, you know, further down, psychologists might look at how the brain actually works. And then it goes further down into the biochemistry, and ultimately into the physics of what is going on at the molecular level. So, to summarize, things can be very big, but things can also be very small.
What the fuck?
Oh, what the hell? Anyway, but also within sociology, we have this distinction. We can study the society as a whole. We can look at cultures. We can look at social institutions, groups, roles, and go further down. We can also study interactions and the self of individuals. So macro sociology looks at big things, such as social structures, institutions, or civilizations as a whole, while and tries to find patterns in these collectives, while micro sociology looks at things like families, groups, or face-to-face interactions. So macro level patterns that we might want to study, these are things like segregation, network structures, norms, typical beliefs, and ways of acting. So we already talked about that. And at the other end, we have micro level actors. These are individuals who form the population, which exhibits certain macro level patterns. Hello? Hello? Can anybody make me bigger again? Please? Please? Well, that's better. So that was just strange. Anyway, so we have macro level patterns that we want to study, and we have micro level actors that are part of these macro level groupings. In some of the first research that I was doing by myself, I looked at social class and eating and drinking behaviors of people. And I was interested in how these behaviors changed over the time. And I used something very crude like social class, you're in the upper class or in the lower class, to explain whether people eat salad or not. I was always joking that I'm doing the sociology of mashed potatoes.
To mash a potato with, it had all the nutrient taste and all that. As you can see, there isn't that much.
And I was a bit frustrated and unhappy about what I was doing. Where is the value added of sociology? What does sociology contribute that others couldn't explain in a better way? So for me, the solution really was in what Durkheim describes as that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Basically, when you have lots of individuals and you might even perfectly know what they do, it doesn't mean that you know how the collective will behave, what all people do together. And I think that's the value added of sociology. And that had me return my faith into the discipline, that this is something that others don't really do. Economists, psychologists, they don't really link these levels with each other. And I think the value added is that as sociologists, we can make that link. We have an idea about how individuals behave, but then the whole is not just an aggregate of these individuals. It's more than the sum of the parts. In a similar way, Max Weber, another founding father of the discipline, he says that social phenomena should be explained by showing how they result from individual actions, which in turn must be explained through reference to the intentional states that motivate the individual actors. So, social phenomena come about by individuals behaving in a certain way, and those individuals, they behave and act like that given the constraints that they have by being part of society. This is the reference to the intentional states that motivate the individual actors. Robert K. Merton, a guy that we will deal with a few times, he says sociology must deal with micro and macro level phenomena and develop concepts, methods, and data for linking micro and macro analysis. And if you ask me, what is it that sociology contributes? I think the unique selling point really is the linkage of micro and macro level, bringing these things together and showing what is it that makes the whole not just the sum of the parts. What else is going on? Why is the whole not just the sum of the parts? And if it isn't just the sum of the parts, what else is going on? Okay, and now we have something that is called structural individualism. It really just says that we have social structures that constrain individual actions. So whatever I do in society is constrained by the society that I'm part of. And often I'm not even aware of that. So many of the decisions that I make are really affected by my upbringing. My social class background, that has an effect on how I make choices. It has an effect on what I like, what I don't like, what I value, what I don't value. Maybe you heard about the habitus. The habitus is an idea from French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, and somebody explained the habitus once to me as the unchosen principle in all the choices that you make. The unchosen principle in all the choices that you make. So basically, I make choices in my life all day long. I made a choice what to wear this morning, what to have for breakfast, and so on. But there's a principle underlying these choices, means like how I make these choices, that I didn't choose. And that's my upbringing. That's the class background that I'm coming from. Okay, let's talk about James Coleman's boat. That's a schema that we use for making explanations and for conceptualizing what is going on. And here I'm showing you a video from Petri Ilikowski. I know him, and from the Institute of Analytical Sociology, where I used to be deputy director before I came over here to Ireland. So here's the video.
Sociology is interested in how the social world works. Especially it is interested in social wholes like states, communities, organizations and groups. They can be called macro social reality. Individual human beings are the crucial component of these macro-scale social formations. Individuals and their interactions are the micro-social reality. Many of the central questions in sociology are related to relations between macro and micro. Social structures and institutions influence how individuals think and behave. However, nothing in the social world works without individual action. After all, the large-scale social formations are basically made of individuals and their social relationships. The society is not a mere sum of individuals, but how do macro facts depend on facts about individuals? This is what sociologists wish to understand. The Coleman Diagram, or the Coleman boat, is an intellectual tool designed to help to think about these micro-macro relations. It was made famous by James Coleman, an influential American sociologist. This video will show you how the diagram works. Let us first take a look at the components. At the top we have the macro-scale social reality, and at the bottom there is an individual agent. The diagram is flexible. Depending on whether we are interested in groups, organizations or nations, we can choose that as the macro scale. The micro usually consists of individual persons, but in some applications the micro agents can also be families, firms or other organized groups. When using the diagram, the starting point is a relation between macro nodes A and D. The arrow 4 refers to a hypothetical causal relation between them. With the help of the diagram, we can study whether such causal relation makes sense. This is done by reconstructing the underlying causal mechanism. Understanding the mechanism is important for two reasons. First, the absence of a sensible and empirically supported mechanism raises serious doubt about the causal relation. Second, the mechanism provides explanatory understanding. Understanding how the cause produces the effect is the key for scientific phenomenon. Does universal basic income increase or decrease social inequality? This is a causal claim about macro-social facts that can be used as an illustration. In the diagram, the introduction of the basic income by the government would be the node A, and the change in social inequality, the node D. The arrow 4 would represent the suggested causal relation. The relevant micro-agent would be individuals and families. The first step in the reconstruction of the mechanism is to figure out how the macro change influences an individual. This is the arrow 1. The macro change can transform the opportunities and incentives of the individual. It can also influence her beliefs or desires. For example, the introduction of the basic income could change individuals' level of income, her relation to welfare bureaucracy, and her beliefs about what is expected from her. It is also possible that the basic income changes the skills and abilities of the individual by influencing her educational choices. All these multiple influences are registered at the node B. The same macro change can influence different individuals differently. In the case of basic income, persons' employment status, level of income, and age make important differences. For this reason, it's not sufficient to assume that any individual can represent the whole population. The causal influence of A on B is mediated by structural and institutional background conditions. The same policy change can have very different consequences in different institutional contexts. While these background conditions are not represented in the diagram, one of its purposes is to help social scientists to think about them. The next step is the arrow 2. It covers the theory of individual behavior. Do the changes in B have behavioral consequences, and if so, what are they? In the case of basic income, we can assume that changes in work-related incentives will affect behavior of some individuals, but will changes in social expectations also have behavioral consequences? Here, sociologists can be helped by psychological theories and findings, but quite often they have to rely on their own common sense. The behavioral assumptions matter, but they can be empirically tested. The node C leaves us with changes in individual behaviors. To complete our sociological analysis, we have to get back to macro-social facts. This is covered by the arrow 3. According to Coleman, this micro-to-macro link has been neglected in sociological theory. It is still quite common to assume that the macro outcome is a mere aggregate or an average of the micro facts. One of the reasons for this is the interdependence of micro actions. The behavior of an individual depends on how other individuals behave. This feedback loop can be represented by the arrow 5. In this loop, the original changes in behavior bring about new changes in B. If the labor market participation goes down, it becomes easier to find a new job and the salaries will go up. This will affect the behavior of the people still in the labor market. If part-time working becomes more common, more people would find it an acceptable alternative. However, if the number of people working goes down, that would also affect how much taxes the government can collect. This would affect the level of basic income the society can provide. These interdependencies make the social analysis both exciting and difficult. Only by understanding how they work, it is possible to make sense of the micro-macro link. What is the effect of basic income on social inequality will depend on these details. This video has shown how the Coleman diagram can be used to analyze complex social processes. The diagram is not a summary of any particular sociological theory. It is a device for making it easier to see what kind of theories we need.
Okay, so let's summarize this. We have macro level phenomena, that are related with each other, but in order to explain them, we need to think about how do these macro level phenomena affect individuals. And that's sort of depicted by this arrow going down. And that arrow means constraints, like I cannot do whatever I want. I'm just limited by society, or maybe I'm limited by the ways of my thinking, but also there are opportunities. I'm not just acting in the void. I cannot just do whatever I want. I need to have opportunities for doing things. And these opportunities, they often depend on where you are in society. It depends on who you know. Sometimes it's where you live. Sometimes it's who you are. Okay, so individuals act, they do something, and we have different theories of actions that can help here. But then we're not done. We need to think about what happens when lots of individuals act in a certain way. How does that change the macro level situation? And by doing that, it actually changes the constraints and opportunities for other people. And that is where we are aggregating things. So 1 + 1 is not necessarily 2 when it comes to society. And the reason for that is because I behave in a certain way, which has an effect on you, and then you behave in a certain way, which has an effect on somebody else, and that can lead to cascades, to chain reactions that trigger an overall outcome that is very different from what all of us wanted to have in the first instance. And that's the micro-macro link. And you could think it even further, like how are individuals embedded in society? They experience it through the connections that they have to others. Now they act, and these actions and behaviors, they affect other people that these individuals are associated and connected with. And so you could say that you really want to have social networks in the center of it. And that's why I'm studying social networks in my research. So you could say for that boat to sail, you need to have social networks at the very core of it. So much about the micro-macro link.
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Your boat merrily, 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 life is but a merrily, merrily, life is but a row your boat gently down the stream. Your boat merrily, 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 life is but a merrily, merrily, life is but a dream.